Yeah, I just had a number of delayed internal shifts. The biggest one was that you can take action regardless of how you feel. And it's so simple, but it was really this pivotal revelation that I had that has just continued to serve me. So I'm not going to blow smoke up anybody's ass, but I'm progressing in the direction that I want to go.
Do you think there's something inside you still that feels like you have to justify ambition with wanting to change the world?
Well, that's kind of an all or nothing approach to that. I'm an ambitious guy, and I know there's one thing for certain. I'm not going to be happy ever going back to a 9-to-5 type of thing.
All right, so welcome to today's podcast, everyone. Today we have Ry. Ry, I'd love for you to open up just with what's the before, what's the after, both on an external level and on an internal level.
Before and after, external, internal, from the arena. So, yeah, I would say when I came to you, Itamar, I was in a pretty tough spot. I think you saw that in the first couple calls. I was in a pretty low point, just struggling to take action in a lot of ways. It was like I knew that I wanted to do this, have this pursuit with my business, and I was just stuck. And I also knew that it wasn't on a fundamental business level. It was more of the emotional roadblock level. And having listened to your podcast and just followed you and your emails for probably a year or more leading up to that, I knew what the investment was, and I knew that you were my guy. I kind of had you in my mind for like quite a few months, thinking like when the time's right, this is what we're going to pull the trigger on. And yeah, the after was just, I was struggling. The tangible external stuff before was just, struggling to make ends meet with my business and scraping by. I was only about a year, not even a year into going back off on my own since consulting for another coaching company. After the arena, I just had a number of delayed internal shifts. And the biggest one was probably just the thing that you really helped me realize that you can take action regardless of how you feel. And it's so simple, but it was really this pivotal revelation that I had that has just continued to serve me. So, I pretty soon after, I think I at least doubled my business, my revenue, which was, I'm not killing it by any means. I'm like just a coach trying to make shit happen out here. I'm not going to blow smoke up anybody's ass, but I'm progressing in the direction that I want to go. I'm, and more so the internal stuff that has really shifted and helped me recognize that, okay, if I'm playing the long-term game here, I can do this. I know I can do this. I have the fundamental skills and self-awareness to make it happen.
It's awesome, man. On all levels. So
Yeah.
I want to dig into that because this is really interesting. Well, you said that you can take action regardless of how you feel. Now, why that's so interesting, for context, like everyone listening in, you're extremely well educated. I think you also studied psychology on some level, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like if there was somebody that was coming from never having any awareness around this stuff, and then they would have come to that realization and be like, okay, cool, that makes sense. What do you think, though, the messaging from like the outside world or whatever it is that got in your way from seeing that this whole time? Like what taught you otherwise, that your emotions should dictate your actions?
Oof. That's a great question. And I would say I don't know. I don't know for sure. If I were to guess, I would think that it's just such is the case with so many aspects of who we are as people in the moment. It's just a massive, can I swear?
Go for it.
It's a massive clusterfuck of like variables, right? That we want to be able to, as humans, we are so wired to want to categorize, label, explain. And in reality, we're just it's far more rational, I think, to just describe what's factual. So I don't really know, to answer your question. I think it's just a variety of reinforcement and perhaps sort of interrelation between genetics and conditioning from my parents and observation, modeling, all the stuff that we know exists within the development of a human brain and body. It's like I just sort of learned to think, if I feel a certain way, then it means I don't have to, or shouldn't rather, take action in this regard. And I would lose
Yeah.
sight of what I really want,
Speak more to that. What do you mean by that? By lose sight of what I really want?
I can trivialize. It's like it almost is like I don't know for sure. I do consider myself reasonably well read. There's certainly, I'm somewhere along the spectrum. I'm not on either sides of the extreme. But I think past a certain point, the brain can, fairly well read people can trivialize their behavior with the best of them, right? I don't think dichotomously, so I can masterfully justify something and even describe it in a way that convinces people in front of me and myself, and yet it's just a deviation from what I had initially said. It's basically me. It was me kind of coming up against challenges, emotional challenges that were scary, and I'd find a way to bail out
Yeah.
or change my goals. And so my new kind of thinking around that is like, there's a lot of very smart pessimists out there. I don't know if I would consider myself that, but I don't think one is smart if you find problems to every solution, right? It's someone who strikes me as highly intellectual is one who has a clear vision of what they want, understands that there's going to be a variety of problems that occur in pursuit of that, and are able to seek solution, be solution oriented along that journey.
Yeah. Like there's a saying in Silicon Valley that the pessimists get to be right, the optimists get to be rich.
Yeah,
And it's
there you go. Yeah,
it's like it's easy to be a pessimist because you feel really smart. Because the reality is, in a lot of the things we do in entrepreneurship, like most of them are going to be a miss. There's going to be just some of them
yeah,
that have an outsized return. So we can always say, "Oh, I feel good about myself because I know this isn't going to work." But to kind of like pull it back a little bit to what you were saying, I think it's really interesting because what you were saying, and I'm sure this happens to a lot of people, is that you had an initial goal, that you knew why it was important, you were attached to it, and then along the way there was some emotional discomfort.
hmm
And what you weren't aware of or able to do back then was to say, okay, this is the emotional discomfort here. I need to solve this and keep moving forward. Instead, what happens with most people is like you get to that emotional discomfort and then you're like, let me backtrack a little bit. Maybe this goal wasn't actually worth it. And we tell that to ourselves in order to avoid the emotional discomfort.
Yep, exactly.
So this is really interesting because before you got into that, I was thinking from my side, that's what I saw create the biggest shift in you. I think it was that awareness that we don't have to be victims to our feelings, so to speak,
hmm
that you can do regardless of how you feel. But second, I think when we started to break down your biggest fears around what will it mean if it doesn't go well, then all of a sudden that courage gap, so to speak, wasn't as big and you were able to execute.
Yeah,
Does that kind of resonate when you look back at it?
for sure. And the funny thing is that it's not even like I needed a ton of courage. It was just the consistency with the simple things that pay off. It's not like I don't know, I still kind of, to be honest, grapple with what my ambitions are. I don't know if I need to like change the world or be the complete the ultimate in my industry. Like,
Yeah.
I know that on the trajectory that I'm on, and just my curious nature and commitment to knowledge acquisition and attempting to implement that information into my practice, I'll inevitably end up somewhere in that elite realm, I think,
Yep.
if I just persist. And but do I need to change the world? I don't know. But I do think
Can I
it's
jump in, right?
important. Yeah, please.
Do you think there's something inside you still that feels like you have to justify ambition with wanting to change the world? Instead of like ambition, I just want something big for myself. I want a better life. I want a bigger life, whatever. Maybe I want to support my family, whatever it may be. It's like hear that a lot, and it's interesting. People think I need to have this big why about changing the world in order to
Yeah,
justify getting big returns. So you can just say like, I want a bigger life for myself. That's perfectly valid. And I wonder if that's something that
it's a
kind of
great
hits.
call out. It's a great call out, because you're right. It's kind of an all or nothing approach to that, which does not need to exist. So yeah, no, there's not, and I definitely do have that ambition for sure. I know I'm an ambitious guy, and I know there's one thing for certain: I'm not going to be happy ever going back to like a 9 to 5 type of thing. You know,
So,
I've
dude, lean into that.
concluded that.
Own it. You can say like, the reason
Yeah,
I'm doing this is because I love to play this game. Like you said, like I love to keep challenging myself. I love to keep putting things out there, and I know that if I keep playing the game the right way, results will come for me, and I can be
yeah,
content and happy with that. I don't need to change the world. It's fine. You
yeah.
help enough people to get what they want, you'll get what you want. It's that simple.
True, man. And that's it. The simplicity with which you can say that, and that, I think that's for me, it's like that habit stuff. I mean, I've become quite decent for myself at like self-coaching and just writing those things out, which can be, tough at times when you're feeling those emotional roadblocks, which inevitably do pop up still. But to just go through that, and you're doing the opposite there of like trivializing your pursuit, right? So it's helpful.
So I want to pull on that thread because you said
Hmm.
something here about your self-talk and your self-coaching. You mentioned that earlier as well.
Hmm.
When you recorded a testimonial for us after the program, one of the most fascinating things that you said to me, like the way I took it, and also I thought it was very like big of you, really, really big of you to own that, is that you said that sometimes after the calls, there would be a part of you that wanted to be like, this isn't going to work. And you would like write an email that like the draft to me to send me like, this is not going to work because of this, that, these are all the reasons.
Yeah.
And then you would be like, I'm not going to send this email because that's bullshit.
Hmm.
But I thought it was first off so big of you to acknowledge that. I think everybody has that resistance on some level, like the skepticism, let's call it, not resistance, skepticism. It's something that's completely departed from how they've operated the past 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And like you literally had a practice of writing that down, but then you're also looking it in the face and saying, no, like this is just my bullshit, or that's just how I took it. But I'd love for you to talk about like what that was for you, how you went through it, because I think that's it was such a unique thing that you owned that. Because most people, I think, kind of go through it on a little level, but they don't own it as fully as that. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit about it.
Cool. Yeah. That was a great exercise. And funny enough, as a bit of a deviation from your question, like coming out of that, I think that at least in any significant life transformational program or coaching, I almost see that that's kind of set the standard. It's like if there's not this disruption occurring in my cognition and my
Mm-hmm.
worldview, I've gone through that enough now that I can see that in my own brain, and I know it's a good thing. It's a
So if it's
good
not
thing.
really kind of rattling the cage a bit or making you feel a bit agitated on some level or a bit disruptive, then it means it actually not challenge you to grow. Is that correct?
Exactly. Like I don't
Very
want to
well said.
be
Yeah.
I don't want to be in a fucking coaching environment where we're just like patting each other on the back all the time. I don't want to be if I hire someone, and it's again why I was drawn to you, because I kind of just knew intuitively, seeing your podcast videos and stuff for many months beforehand. It's like, okay, this guy knows how to deliver certain messages that are hard hitting, but in a way that is received well because they're said with compassion, and most often they're true. It's like there's no better combination in my mind for that. So yeah, it was a funny process, man, but I would just write it out, and that's something I've acquired as a skill for me. I would, when I first started coaching, I would have conversations with myself and play the role of both parties. Like if I
Yeah.
said this as this client that's victimizing themselves, which I do, like I have that tendency to kind of, I feel this way, therefore I shouldn't have to do this. It's like it really is
Yeah.
this kind of victimization of myself, and that's been a huge part of that. So I would come off those calls. It was also really early, right, my time, so
Yeah.
I would be like
I think it was
disrupted
4 a.m.,
sleep.
right?
Yeah, I was at 4 a.m.,
Yeah.
so I'd be like super tired and kind of disrupted sleep, but they would be powerful calls, and then I would just have this moment to like sit in it, and then there would be things that I would think of, and I'd write it out, and I wrote out a couple emails, and I would just go through them. Like I'm a very thorough guy, and I don't, I would just go through and be like, well, that's not true, and fuck, I know what he would say there. He's gonna ask me this, and here's how I would answer this. Like that's, again, I've had that before in
Yeah.
the past with another quite life transformational coach, and I would hear his voice in my brain to my questions. His questions,
Yeah.
what his questions would be to my questions. So I'd think of a question and be like, well, what about this? And then I would be like, God, he's going to say this, and I know the answer to that already. And that was like, I mean, there's no better. I've had clients say that to me as well. They're like, I thought about doing this and I heard your voice in my head. I'm like, I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but you made the right call given your goals.
Yeah.
So great.
So let's get to that. I think this is really interesting to say about the goals. When, in the arena, the big thing we do is first we get clarity, and then we boil down into an effective mindset. What needs to be your priorities and your rules. So make things very clear, this is what you should do.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest priority that I feel like was a fulcrum point for you was when you decided to prioritize commitment, like regardless of how you felt.
Mm-hmm.
And like the big rule was that I complete my top priorities for the day, regardless of how I feel. And for me, I think that was a tipping point, because that was a decision to say, okay, once I do this, I have to recognize that if I'm going against it because of how I feel, that's just my internal bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And then that gave you the lens of like, okay, I can't be untrue to who I want to be, so to speak. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yep.
So first of all, how has that been going for you, the whole commitment aspect?
It's been amazing. I mean, definitely had some delayed effects of the whole process, and it's kind of like the old cliche, like success breeds success, right? When I define within the context of the arena what my key things that I would get complacent on were, and I would hone in on those. And again, it didn't require crazy courage. They weren't like go up and speak in front of 1,000 people every day or whatever. It was just like take action on certain fundamental daily behaviors. So yeah, it's been great. And I do still grapple with certain things in terms of prioritization with school and papers due and what's important in my business and all that stuff. But in terms of like saying, oh, I don't feel like doing this, it doesn't happen anymore. It's just like I can dial things down and say, okay, well, I'm still going to do X amount. If that means, DMs to prospective clients or whatever, I just turn the dial down and figure out what is appropriate given the capacity that I've got that day.
Yeah. I want to challenge you here, if it's okay, about the
Cool.
courage part.
Please.
So what you were saying, it doesn't require a lot of courage because it's not a big thing. Now, I think there's a couple components here. There's one, the magnitude of the task itself. Like, for example, talking in front of 400 400 people, whatever, it'd be a big audience. Like that's kind of what I'm hearing saying. Like that requires a lot of courage, not just like sending out another this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll challenge that because I think there's an extra component of the emotional weight we attach to everything, the emotional meaning anything has. So, for example, like I'm pretty comfortable talking in front of crowds of 400 people, 1,000 people, whatever it may be, because I've never had any issues around public speaking or around being in front of a group in like a leadership position. I've always done well with that.
Mm-hmm.
However, I could see if somebody like, and I've had clients like this, they're like a CEO of a very successful company. He was terrified to do public speaking, even though it would grow his company. And when we got down to the bottom of it, like why that happened, because he was like, well, we figured out that when he was 12, he tried to tell a joke on the school bus and all the kids laughed at him. So he created this association that if I put myself out there in public, it's going to be very unpleasant.
So it must have been a good joke, though. No?
They laughed at him, not at his joke.
I got
They
you.
made fun of him. Yeah. And he was scarred by that. And I think a big thing is a lot of times what I've seen in a lot of entrepreneurs, they tell themselves, I shouldn't feel weird about doing this. I should just do it. But what it is, like you're ignoring what's going on here. So it's like you're just shoving it aside. But if you can say, you know what, I do feel weird about this for some reason. Let me figure out why that is. Why does this require courage from? Why is this so uncomfortable? Because that you can start to figure out what it is, and then you can resolve that.
Yeah, that's well said. It is
if
true.
I can share. Sorry, Ryan.
Yeah, please. No, go ahead.
Can I share your example here?
Yeah.
So I remember for me, what the big thing was, they were saying that if I fail at something, people will see that I'm not as good as they think I am. That was one of your beliefs from the arena that I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, of course, that puts like we all want to feel like we're good. We all want people to have a high opinion of us. This is primal thing, the tribal thing. We want people to approve of us and all that kind of jazz. And of course, if that's something that's in the back of your head, even with just putting out content, growing the business, whatever it may be, it's going to play up. And when we broke down why it is, growing up as a kid, you had a really big concern about what others would think. And they recognize, I'm putting that on this thing. And that's why it feels so hard.
Yeah.
And the moment we broke that down, like you said, like you can choose who you want to earn respect from. Not everybody, not this. We say, okay, the right kind of people, they'll respect what I'm doing. And those are the people that I choose to have respect from. That's what I saw from the side. When that happened, you really started to give yourself permission to go because you were like, oh, okay, this is what's actually going on. I shouldn't just try to like say, this shouldn't be that difficult. I should just do it. But you're like, okay, now I know why it feels difficult. Now I figure out why it feels difficult. Now I falsified that and figure out a better frame for this. So now it actually doesn't feel as difficult. It feels like it should, like you were saying, like it shouldn't be. And then you're able to go.
Yeah. No, that's a pretty keen idea of what happened. And it's not to say that the emotional and cognitive blocks still don't occur, right? It's just being able to put a finger on it and say, this is, even in just giving it a name, like saying this is the aspect of Ry that seeks everyone's approval as opposed to specific groups of people who I look up to and aspire to be like. And that's something where when I do lose sight of that and don't surround myself with the right people, which can be tough, and you can kind of just get pulled back into those old traps again,
Yeah. I think what you said there is something that's worth leaning into. Having that terminology to know, okay, who's in the driver's seat right now and who's in the passenger seat is really powerful. And for you to say, okay, this is old Ry. This is like little kid Ry who wasn't yet aware of what he really wanted and who he cared about and all that. Oh shit, he's in the driver's seat right now. Instead of saying, you know what, who's this adult version of Ry, this ambitious Ry that he only cares about who he cares about, and the rest of it he anticipates they're not going to like it in some way. And who am I letting in the driver's seat right now?
Yes.
I think having those terms that we can constantly refer back to and ask ourselves, who's in the driver's seat right now, who's making decisions, is really powerful.
I fully agree. Yeah, those are super helpful for me. Who's at the helm right now? Who's steering this ship? Yeah. It's important for sure.
Cool, man. So we kind of got pretty quickly to the things that I wanted to cover, but I want to ask you from your perspective, were there any other big things that you saw either that helped you in your process or that you thought like other arena members next to you, things you think that could be really valuable to put out there?
Oh man, there's a few. If I were to be concise, which sometimes is hard for me, as you know, the aspect of delving into the emotions and background and stuff, comes very naturally ish to me, or at least it's a skill that I've developed. So coming into the arena, none of that was unusual or too disruptive. I could see, I think, how for someone like, let's say, taking the stereotypical man, this is a huge overgeneralization, but if you were to take sort of like the stereotypical, maybe my age or older type guy who's had a bit of an aversion to, you know, therapy and exploration of various past events and emotional baggage or whatever else may be occurring, I could see how that would be a challenging thing for them. And again, the way that you package it in the arena and execute on the whole process was just so different. So I saw it as this like beautiful, and it's kind of, to be honest, what I think about in terms of my business. It's why I'm studying psychology. I want to continue doing what I'm doing within nutrition, but big picture, I think kind of as the industry changes, we're going to see this merging of the more like traditionally action oriented coaching and the more sort of just aimless talk through everything therapeutic approach.
Yeah.
So you have taken these two, and at least in my experience, kind of just started to merge that. Like, we're going to have a curriculum, we're going to go through these things, and we're going to, you know, deal with some pretty heavy shit, which is tough to do with 6 guys in a group because we're all at different levels and whatnot, and levels of willingness and awareness and all of that. So it was cool to see, even just from my perspective, how you operated with that. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. It was just like a really, I haven't seen that before with that, like, yes, it's action oriented, but it's also, we're going to talk about some heavy stuff.
So first of all, I appreciate all that. That's first off. So the reason I was asking that was more so, what do you think helped you progress? So for people listening at home that are kind of in your situation, and from what I'm hearing from you, you're saying that the thing that helped you progress was taking on something that was very action oriented. But in order to move forward, you recognize I have to let go of some of the specific stuff in the past. It wasn't just aimlessly wandering around looking at our past, but in order to move forward, in order to commit, for example, just putting myself out there, doing these actions, then you figure out, okay, what's the specific heavy stuff that causes me to hold myself back? And then when that was released for you, that's why it was transformative, so to speak. And that's why it was also very disruptive.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, that's fundamentally the toughest part, which I still don't even know how that works. I don't think anybody knows necessarily, like, how do you facilitate an entire shift in worldview? I don't know. You have to be willing to do that already, I think, in order to progress. And I know you've seen, the opposite of that, where it's like, oh no, this is so uncomfortable to an individual that they're just not willing to do it. I've seen it for sure too, and I've seen it myself, and it's like, it's a gross feeling when you come up against that disruption. And but man, there's just such benefit on the other side of it.
I want to ask you about that because you said you
Hmm.
kind of been like following this stuff for a year or so, and you kind of had it on, like the board. So first off, I want to hear what it's a three-part question. What about it resonated with you? They're like, I need to do this. What made you say I'm going to do this someday instead of today? And then what finally made you cross the chasm, so to speak? Because you talked a little bit like you have to have the desire to do this.
Yeah,
So I wonder if it's just desire, if there's other components there as well.
I could answer your question very clearly. What made me want to do it was just seeing the way that you coach. It was just hearing your message, that resonating with me. You're very rational, and you delivered things very directly, and they were difficult to say and even more difficult to hear, I'm sure. And yet they were delivered in a way where I was like, this guy gives a shit and he's all in this. And so that was just like, I knew kind of I didn't see that elsewhere, and I still haven't really seen that elsewhere, to be honest. What initially didn't get me or made me think I'll do this eventually was just the cost. I was just like
Yeah.
scraping by. I'd just gone on back off on my own, and uh, in coaching, it was just like, I just can't justify that cost right now. I just want to let me do this, this, and this, and get to that point. What got me to that point of saying, let's do this, was probably despair, man. Like probably just being in such a uncomfortable state where I was just like not happy with where my life was at, just being like, yeah, just feeling like I needed a big shakeup and make a scary investment. And I had all the evidence I needed, having followed you for so long. So that was it. And then we hopped on a call, and I was just like, all right, let's go.
Awesome, man. So a question for you on top of that, because I appreciate you're saying complimentary things about me. I do appreciate it. About question number one, like what initially got you interested? I'd love to hear
Mm-hmm.
about like that from your perspective, not about like me or about my program, but it's about doing this, like saying, okay, like I need to come to this shift. What caused that awareness in you? You said, like, I really need to have this shift.
Trying to remember way back when I started following you. Oh, you know what? Okay, yeah. Like the backstory that I think you're aware of was, I worked for another brilliant dude who's like Hormozy's best buddy, Dr. Kashi.
Hmm.
Hormozy gets
I didn't
like,
know that name.
yeah, he gets like most of his stuff from Trevor Kashi, who I had the privilege of working for like directly for a year and a half. I was one of his coaches, and I would literally have conversations with him, and then like two weeks later see Hormozy's content pop up, and it'd be like a lot of the shit that we
Yeah.
talked about. He gets a
Yeah.
ton of it, and Hormozy's very open about that. He's like, I get most of my stuff from Kashi.
Yeah.
So that was an example of what I had said earlier, that disruption. There wasn't a single conversation that I had with that man that I didn't leave with my head absolutely spinning and just being like, what is even happening right now? He would just question things, and he was very compassionate as well. Like, you knew that he cared about you, but he just thought on another planet. He just thought about behavior down to its granular level, and he had such a grasp on it's what basically spurred me to go back to school and delve more into psychology and human and animal behavior, because now I can think about things in that regard. So I think I was just kind of transitioning out from that. And to be honest, when I left that company, I went through a pretty dark period of like feeling like I'm this incompetent coach because I'll never stack up or compare to this man who I was mentored by and worked for 18 months. And yet I don't want to go back to my former life as a sales rep, just peddling products that I don't care to peddle. And
Yeah.
So I went through a pretty rough spot, and I don't know how to say it other than my own despair, and and then just again the compliments that I have about you. It was just the way that you talked about stuff, and it was also, I think, just having done therapy for years and been being open to all that whole realm. I knew it wasn't just discipline and action strictly that I needed. It was
Yeah,
there's these weird hangups within me emotionally, these stories and narratives that I'm telling myself that are restricting me from doing the things I want to do.
it's big, man. Appreciate you sharing that. So, what would you tell somebody at home if they're in a similar situation to where you were, let's say, last October? Like, what would your advice to them be?
I would
They're kind of
say,
feeling stuck. They don't want to go back. They feel a bit of despair, frustration, whatever it is. What would you say to them?
yeah, I would say that if it were someone in my exact scenario, I would say, you can make this happen financially. It's not ideal, but you can make it happen, and you're only losing money by not doing it sooner. I know that's cliche, but it is true. It's just
Yeah.
make it happen. I think that I hit a moment of despair there, and then there was a phase of decent productivity, and then another moment of despair where I signed up. And I think I could have taken action on that first moment, and I would have benefited from that, and quite possibly, um, just been further ahead. Not that I'm too concerned about that, but I've had, months, a few months now of pretty solid, just forward thinking and action taking since the program. So I'd encourage
Awesome,
them
man.
to pull the trigger.
Appreciate that. Any questions you have for me before we get going today?
Man, I wish I prepared a couple. Um, Questions for you. I would say, I would ask, what do you, or is that even something? Do you see any overlap, in terms of, because I think we're very different people. That's the one thing I do wonder about. I go, Itamar and I are very different. We have very different backgrounds and upbringings. And I just wonder whether you struggle with similar stuff. And if so, how you've navigated around that.
First, of course, I struggle with stuff. Like, I'm a human. Like, I think
No,
people sometimes
struggle for
forget.
sure, but
Yeah,
similar stuff. I've been pretty, I don't know if I've been clinically depressed, but pretty fucking low before, and I don't know. It just things like that. I wonder about the similarities.
yeah. So I think I went through something. I was never clinically depressed or anything of that nature, but I was pretty down. There was a certain point in my military career where I got very, very severely injured, and I wasn't sure what my future would hold and how it would look like that. And I knew I was going to pay a pretty big price as far as the training and having to drop back a couple of classes and all that kind of jazz. And it was due to, factually speaking, it was due to a very, let's call it a negligent command. What was actually later understood as an illegal command I was given by an officer during training. I had already dislocated my shoulder in the day before, and then he told me I had to keep training Krav Maga. The reason being, he wanted to show that his soldiers were tough. There were a couple teams in the unit, and it was before deciding which team has which special utility operation. Some of them are more prestigious than others, and he wanted to show off that his team was the toughest in front of the high ups, whatever it may be. And that really caused me to have to take a big step back in my career. And I was, beyond being very upset about it, I was very angry. And I didn't yet have the maturity to understand that I can either be angry at him and angry at the world, or I can say, this is what it is, what's going to be more effective. And I think that for me was a time where I was in a way, falling to victimhood about like, why did this have to happen to me? I was so motivated. I was doing the right things. I went so hard. Even like when I was told to do this, I did it. And why am I now suffering the consequences? Where in reality, like probably if I wouldn't have been told to keep training for the week after the injury, I would have come back probably in a month and a half. You know, like you're 18, everything heals quickly when it's just done properly. And I think that was it for me, where I fell into a lot of self-talk about like, everyone's trying to get out against me. This is just this, da da da. And that's why when I heard you talk about that email that you would write, like all the negative self-talk, and you're like, no, I'm going to choose not to listen to that voice. I was like, I wish I would have been able to do that when I was 18. And I think I would have saved myself a lot of headache, a lot of issues, and also just gotten better results. And that's why I think it's so powerful. That was a lesson that I had to learn like retroactively, looking back at it. Like, oh, what happened there? And I think the fact that you were able to do that in real time while you're going through the program was so powerful. And I think that's why you're also getting such big results, because you have that skill set. Like, that was the main reason I wanted to have you on the podcast. Beyond you sharing your experience and all that, I thought you sharing that lesson with other people, that you're going to have this other voice in your head, that especially as trying to disrupt yourself and trying to grow from this previous version of yourself to this new one, you're going to have that old voice like, don't do that for all these reasons. Like, it's not your fault. You don't have to, whatever it may be. This is just going to be tougher. It's not actually going to get you a result. You don't really want this goal. Like you said, like they're justifying that. But if you can be aware of that voice in your head, it can like lower you, like young you, kid Ry, whatever you want to call it. And then say, okay, I'm not going to fall victim to this voice. I am not going to dictate my actions. That's when powerful things can happen. And I think the fact that you did that is really commendable. The fact that you have that skill set is really powerful. And I think that's the biggest thing what I want to take people take away from this podcast, man.
Appreciate that. Yeah. It comes and goes, but it's there. I got it. It's in the toolkit, you know.
And that's the thing, man, as well. That the fact that it comes and goes. People think that it's, you don't have any issues, you're good and all that. But the powerful thing is to be able the kind of person that has like that resilience, that when those voices do come along, and they will come along, especially as like you keep trying to disrupt yourself. If you're just staying stagnant, yes, those voices might disappear because you're in your comfort zone. But if you keep trying to grow beyond your current capabilities into your growth zone where it literally doesn't feel comfortable because it's not your comfort zone, and you're going to be disrupting the ways you used to operate, you used to think, there's going to be old voices. So if you have the skill set to recognize this is supposed to be there, that old voice that is trying to tell me why we shouldn't do this or why it'll just fail or why whatever it may be, that voice is supposed to be there. But also what else is supposed to be there is your ability to not listen to it, not let that sit in the driver's seat and control your life. Yeah, I think that's the real powerful thing.
For sure.
That's a skill set that allows you to keep going up and up and up and up and up and up. It's not just a one-time thing.
Do you, just quickly on that, do you use like, what do you use for any kind of specific self-coaching, or you just have one of your coaches on call that you sort of tap into and such when you hit hang-ups like that?
So everybody operates a little bit differently. So I'm not a very visual person. I think more in principles and more in concepts. So for me, it doesn't help me as much to say, is this old Itamar, is this new Itamar, or whatever it may be. But for me, what's really helpful to know is this my issues around control. I know that's my biggest issue that I have. That's going to have at least some scar tissue because I had that old issue with Al-Qaeda. Whenever I almost gave up a little bit of control, it had literal severe like life or death consequences when I was in the agency. And I recognize that there's still a part of my brain that desires control in a disproportionate amount. So whenever I'm stretching my boundaries, whether it's growing the business, the team, it's like my personal life, letting people in, whatever it may be, and I feel a certain level of discomfort, I notice to myself, like, is this an issue with control that is not valid? That emotionally, I feel like I want more control, but logically, I don't actually need it. It's just an emotional thing. And for me, that frame allows me to recognize, okay, this is just a feeling I'm having. I don't have to listen to that. I don't have to be held like captive by this feeling. And for me, that's the way I coach myself around this stuff.
Interesting. Does that make sense? That's awesome. It does. Yeah. I think I might. Yeah, that resonates with me, which is a great way to frame it. I like it. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think if a person who knows his main insecurities and the main desires that pull him is a very powerful individual, because they
Yeah.
won't get blindsided by those emotions, their insecurities and desires, and therefore be pulled in the wrong direction. Like if whenever, for example, myself, I'm expanding and I know, okay, I'm about to meet this barrier where it's going to feel uncomfortable because I'm going to have to relinquish control in order to grow into this vision of what I want things to be. Then when I see it there, I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to feel this way. This isn't an indicator that I'm doing something wrong. And
Hmm.
I think what we were saying at the beginning of the podcast, in the past, I think you perhaps didn't have the full awareness or the toolkit to say that just because I have a feeling, that doesn't mean that it's an indicator that something is wrong. It's just a feeling.
Yeah.
That's the big thing. Like once people are okay having a feeling and recognizing this is just a feeling, it's just I can keep going forward, then they go forward. It's like when people, I see this like the simplest analogy is when people go into the ice bath, and I'm sure you've seen this, people just go, they start panicking and losing their breath. But if you just accept, listen, it's going to be cold. It's supposed to feel cold, but you
Hmm.
don't have to suffer from this, and you do not have to panic. That's when things change. And I think it's
Yeah.
an analogy for our growth, for life, and so on.
I
Does that
agree.
answer the question?
Very much so. I appreciate that.
Cool. Anything else? Should we wrap it up?
Let's wrap it up.
All right, man. Again, Ry, like I want to say thank you again for doing the podcast, man. Thank you for sharing everything. Thank you for being so open, and also congrats on your success, man. That's like
Thank
couldn't be
you.
happy for you, man. It's awesome to see it. And again, man, congrats on crushing it.
Appreciate you, man. Thanks for having me on.
Likewise, man. All right, we will see everyone on the next episode.